First, I'll apologize. I didn't get the background to work. This is my second background fail. I promise I'll nail it next time. You get to stare at this beautiful wood paneling. David, it's so nice to see you this morning. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
It's, I guess, afternoon, probably where you're sitting. Is that right?
Yes, it's 3 p.m. here, and it's fairly sunny, which is very uncommon for this time of year.
Well, beautiful. I'm happy to hear that. Sunny in New York as well. So I want to start with a little congratulations. You were personally just named one of Forbes' 50 most entrepreneurial CMOs of 2022. I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit, just to kick things off, about how you're able to act entrepreneurially inside of a large global company like Klarna.
I mean, it's almost painful to hear that you're saying that we're now a large global company, right? Because I do think we want to label and see ourselves as fairly entrepreneurial. So I want to be clear on the first thing is I'm actually acting according to how Klarna is. I mean, it's one of our core beliefs. Entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship is extremely important to us. And I mean, I don't think I could have done even remotely close to as good of a job as I've done. So I think I've done so far with Klarna being a big and stiff and slow moving company. So Klarna is entrepreneurial, but I also think that I was hired with a mission to change something, and our CEO and founder has stayed true to that mission, and has tasked me with partly changing Klarna, but also changing an entire industry that needs entrepreneurial change. And then finally, I think we're pretty good at hiring entrepreneurs, right? Either from startups or competitors or people who just have an entrepreneurial spirit. So it's not like I'm alone in the sea of a huge big company, right? I'm together with very entrepreneurial people, and we are on a fairly creative and hard mission. So it's needed from everyone.
Awesome. The culture really is the driving force then behind that effort. I love that. Nextdoor is a pretty mission-driven company too, so I'm super aligned with kind of wake up every day in service of the mission. That's awesome. We're going to talk shortly about some really exciting product announcements that you guys have you've been very busy in the last week,
Yep.
and I'm sure in the many months leading up. But I want to first start with the buy now, pay later aspect of the business, which is probably how most consumers know and relate to your brand. So Klarna remains still the biggest buy now pay later provider globally, just based on monthly active users, over 8.2 million during the third quarter of this year alone. It's an increasingly competitive market. I think I'm sitting in the US where companies like Affirm and Afterpay are pretty commonly known. How do you think about maintaining a global edge? And how do you think about hyper growth markets like the US?
I mean, it's interesting, and first off, I think the buy now pay later labeling in itself is both a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing in a way that to some extent it's a fantastic product, it's a fantastic feature, the giving consumers the ability to spread the cost over time with no interest, no fees. Fantastic for certain purchases, right? It's been fantastic from a growth perspective because it's been in a spotlight from media, from investors, from consumers, from talent, right? So in many ways it's been a blessing, but it's also been a curse. I mean, buy now pay later is not good for everything. It's been under some sort of scrutiny, increased scrutiny, both in the US but globally. And I also don't want Klarna to be labeled as a one-trick pony, right? A large proportion of our volume comes from pay now transactions or pay later transactions. So it's not everything we do is not buy now, pay later. It is actually a small proportion of our volume that is buy now, pay later. But again, I mean, that is what we're currently known for. I'm on a mission to change that as well. But I do think that is also one of our benefits, right? We offer consumers flexible payment methods, and that means the ability to sometimes settle the debt directly, sometimes enter into a longer term financial plan, and sometimes paying with buy now, pay later. And I do think that gives us an edge. I'm not sure that the pure play buy now, pay later companies are going to be around for that long. And I mean, block buying Afterpay, combining it with their current offering, I think you need a broader consumer offering, because the consumers actually do not care about buy now, pay later. The consumers care about flexibility, right? Again, sometimes if you want to buy a $200 pair of sneakers, buy now, pay later is fantastic. If you want to buy a $2,000 sofa, it's probably not very good. And if you want to buy, a $3 pen or whatever you would buy on Amazon, I don't know, right? Maybe it's not good to buy now, pay later either. So the broad range of product actually gives us an edge. And then in combination with us having a global footprint, very few companies have a global footprint, being present in 25 markets, 450,000 merchants. So just our size is impressive. And then finally, I just have to say that I do think that marketing and brand continues to be a way to distinguish ourselves from the masses. As I said, we set out on a mission to change the way that fintechs and alternative payment methods are perceived. And I do still think that we lead that game when it comes to how we represent ourselves, how we talk about our products, our benefits, how we relate to consumers, how we approach consumers. So that makes a huge difference versus the others as well.
I would love to dig in a little on perception. I think in order to participate in people's finances, you have to establish a pretty intense level of trust. Talk to me about the ways that you work, whether it's the marketing, the branding, what other values you guys work to convey that consumers and retailers alike can trust you.
Yeah, I mean, trust is interesting per se. And I mean, I've spent the vast majority of my life leading one of the biggest agencies here in Europe, marketing agencies. And I personally believe that there's a misconception in how trust is built, and that marketing can actually build trust. I do think that's the old perception of things, that you run these big brand building campaigns or running trust campaigns where, I don't know, you see them, like if you close your eyes, you would see the generic trust building campaign. I do not think that trust works like that. I think that the modern consumer is way smarter, way savvier than that, than to fall for that, right? So I think the main way to build trust is to really deliver on your promise. Like, we say one thing in broad messaging and we deliver on that promise in the product, right? That's the main thing. And having a repeatable experience when it comes to that is how you build trust, right? If we say that the product works like this, and then we deliver on that promise over and over again without deviations, I do think that builds trust. Like, that is what once upon a time made McDonald's great, right? The repeatable, trustable experience. I don't think they needed trust campaigns. They said you're going to get a burger, a good tasting, well-tasting burger, you're going to get it quickly, and you're going to get it delivered in the same way every single time. McDonald's has probably changed over the years, but once upon a time, that was the thing, right? And then on top of that, I do think that I think a lot about business models. And I do think the customer nowadays is savvy enough to understand business models. Our business model is actually sustainable. Like, we try to apply a win-win mentality to everything we do. The merchant should win, the consumer should win, and we should win, right? If you look at most of the old, the financial business model of the old days, especially credit cards, that is not a win-win business model. Credit cards make money when you don't repay them. Like, they're not in lockstep. The intentions, the wants, and the needs of the customers and of the credit cards are not aligned, right? And I do think having a sustainable business model, that is also something that builds trust. So what we do with marketing is basically just we try to get people to try the product. That is where trust is built. So instead of talking about trust, I find smart and interesting and fun ways of getting people to try Klarna. And when they try Klarna, they will start trusting Klarna. And if they don't, we don't change the marketing, we change the product.
So a perfect segue into that. The product is changing. It has changed kind of significantly. You guys have made a number of big announcements in the last week. Can you talk us through, from a high level, what some of the highlights of the product announcements were?
Yeah, I mean, historically, we've been very focused at being a payment service, a payment company, which means that we facilitate a transaction. I mean, we've accumulated a huge customer base and almost a huge fan base based on those payment methods being very popular, and that has given us reason to believe that we want to expand our thinking, our way of approaching consumers, our way of building products into a bigger scope, taking a bigger scope of the consumer journey. So if you think about a consumer journey from pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase, we have historically been very good at the actual purchase. What we're doing now is that we're starting to offer services even in the pre-purchase phase, which means discovery, curation, exploration, finding the right product, something that consumers tend to think is more and more cumbersome. Like there's just an abundance of choice, right? So we're introducing a search tool that is specifically catered to shopping. So you can search for any product, any brand, any category. You can find best price, be that a new retail price or used price. You can find best shipping options. You can find best warranties. Finding the product that is the right one for you in our Klarna search, which is a fantastic tool for shoppers. If you don't know what you want, we're introducing what we call shoppable videos, shoppable content. It is a TikTok, Instagram-like experience, but completely centered around products, around shopping. If you want to see hauls, if you want to see more information, if you want to see demos and recommendations, that's the place to go. And I mean, we have thousands of videos with shoppable content that lead you directly to the products. That's fantastic. We're also launching a creator platform, which connects merchants with creators and creators with merchants. We've heard from many merchants that it's hard to manage creators at scale, especially in a data-driven way. And we've heard from creators that it's hard to monetize their audience. We're basically introducing a platform for merchants and for creators to meet in a curated and data-driven way. And then finally, we're updating our sustainability efforts. We've seen good traction for them. We now offer consumers to see their carbon footprint for 50 million products. Which is absolutely fantastic as almost an educational play when it comes to carbon footprint, making people understand what the impact of their shopping is on the planet, and then also giving them the opportunity to actually offset some of that impact. So that was in short what we're launching. But basically, I mean, the top line is we want to turn Klarna from being a payments company and a payments utility into becoming a shopping company and a shopping utility, and us broadening the scope from the purchase experience into pre-purchase, but also post-purchase is a big step in that direction.
It's so ambitious, right? It feels like, and you said it, some of this functionality feels like TikTok or Instagram or Pinterest. Some of it feels like Google. Some of it feels like, a micmac with like shoppable video. I'm curious. So we work a lot in, I don't know if you're familiar with Clayton Christensen's jobs to be done framework, of like, what is the job that your product is doing? It feels like that's an enormous shift really from, at point of sale to before and after the sale.
Yeah.
Was this an enormous internal shift for the company? Did you guys have to realign internally your expectations? How did you navigate a change like this?
It is. I mean, if we compare Klarna today with Klarna 5 years ago, it is a huge shift. The good thing is that those shifts don't happen overnight. They happen fairly organically. We set out a vision, obviously. What kind of company do we want to become? What is the job to be done from from our key products, right? And historically, the job to be done was really to ease the worry around paying for things online. Like that was why we started the company once upon a time. Now we really try to help people save time and save money throughout the entire shopping experience. So most of the things we're building now are just add-ons to where we once started. Like what we really want to do is we want to save time, or help consumers save time, we want to help consumers save money, and we want to release them of their worry, financial worry. Right, and everything we're building is catering towards that. But again, it's obviously a huge shift, right? Moving from 10 years ago being a pure B2B player to now being a B2B2C player. That is a big shift for us. But I do think we've I mean, if there's one thing a startup, especially Klarna, is good at, is pivoting and developing and reinventing yourself, right? I do think if I compare to most of our big competitors, and I almost wouldn't even put PayPal in that, but the really big ones like the banks, their inability to reinvent themselves is probably what's going to, I'm not saying make them crash in the long term, but at least not develop at the same pace as we're doing.
You talked earlier about your relationship with the consumer and the insight that consumers are savvy, shoppers are savvy. You trust them, they trust you. How do you bring your current users along, and how do you acquire new users in light of this shift? What are some creative ways that you're doing that?
I mean, when it comes to existing users, I do think we've set up a very good nudging structure. So like ours, I don't want to get too nerdy, but our structure we've set up around next best actions and understanding like what are the features that bring people in, what are the next best actions based on those behaviors, and then like where do we want people to, what's the end state, what's the future state of a consumer relationship. We have that set up fairly well, but the way in which it works is basically people start using us and fall in love with us based on our flexible payment methods. They then start to experience that, hey, we actually have shopping services connected to that. We have a cutting edge, package tracking feature, digital receipts, return management, all of that connected to that purchase. And after that, they start, exploring and finding out about our, the next level of shopping features, the search and compare feature, shoppable videos, like the add-ons on top of that. So I do think we have a fairly good funnel where we differentiate between what are the products that actually make people start using us and fall in love with us, what are the next best actions, and what are the add-ons then on top of that. And I mean, it's obviously ongoing work, right? It differs between regions, it differs between segments, it differs between products, but really understanding what role we play for different users at different points in time, and then catering our products towards that is, I mean, that is obviously the science we work with every single day.
And your measurements for success must evolve rapidly as the product itself evolves. It's less about just that first acquisition and more about those next best actions.
Yeah, exactly. And is our product good enough to actually make people come back to it beyond the transaction, right? If you look at us 5 years ago, people visited and used Klarna when they were about to transact, right? What we've evolved into now is, again, people tracking their packages, people looking at digital receipts, people getting financial overview and understanding of their spending, people looking at content, people, coming to Klarna just to find the best deal for them and not making a purchase, right? So to us, the number of times a consumer wants to interact with us is obviously a huge measurement of our of the traction that we have.
It makes a ton of sense. You've talked about the complexity a little bit, but the reality that you're a global first company, right? Born and raised in Sweden, growing rapidly in, dozens of markets. Talk to me about the way that your global perspective has influenced your growth and continues to influence your strategies in new markets.
I mean, that's hard. I mean, we started out many years ago with being a Swedish company, as you said, that tried to roll out the Swedish products globally. But financial products are hard because almost every country has their way of conducting business, right? Has their favorite payment methods, has their routines and rituals when it comes to especially online shopping. So rolling out a Swedish product globally has been hard, right? So we've pivoted way more to having a US first approach, but nowadays almost a global first approach, where we make sure that everything we do is globally scalable, where we really try to dig into what are the needs and behaviors that are universal. And then, but I also have to be honest with the fact that it's hard for us because we make daily trade-offs between, do we want to be, extremely relevant, but then maybe not scalable? Or is it okay to be slightly less relevant, but be 100% scalable? And then always the trade-off. And if my CEO heard this, he would say, I want both. And we're obviously striving for both at every single time, right? But it's not that easy. I think it's a constant battle here. I do think what we're seeing, especially because what you have to take into consideration as well, like I'm talking a lot about consumers, but our main customers are our merchants, right? And merchant business nowadays is global. There are fewer and fewer companies, brands, retailers, merchants that are single market ones, right? Even SMBs nowadays are global from the get-go. Like even the smallest, you and I spin up a company that sells sunglasses. We have the world as our platform from day one. So that is a big thing for us. So globalization of trade is obviously something that we are trying to be a part of and to accelerate.
Are there markets you have an eye on?
Always. I mean, we have a huge footprint in Europe. Canada was launched a couple of years, 2 years or 3 years ago, is moving at a very fast pace. Asia continues to be, I wouldn't say difficult, but high barriers to entry. South America, same thing there. But I do think, I mean, we have a couple of more countries to get a tick in the box in Europe, and I think that is our main priority. But I would also, I mean, it's interesting to look at Japan. I think Japan is the second or third biggest market in the world. Fantastic opportunity, immature from a payments and shopping perspective. So we're eyeing that as well.
So, David, you talk about the importance of your relationship with merchants. We can shift now to that we're sitting in Q4, which is hard to believe. The holidays are here. They're upon us. It's shopping season already. You guys recently published a study where there were a couple of interesting trends there. One, notably, was around versus the last 2 years, the in-store experience is becoming important again. I would love to hear a little more about your relationship with merchants in general, and then how they're thinking about and how you're thinking about showing up at a point of sale in person.
Yeah, I mean, Klarna wants to be a ubiquitous experience, and I think merchants more and more demand us to be so, right? They can't have different payment methods and shopping experience online versus offline. The retail industry has been talking about omni-channel for probably 15 years now, and I don't think it's a viable path forward to not think about, even if that's a cheesy way of putting things with omni-channel, right? But being ubiquitous across channels, if that's on desktop, if that's in store, if that's like, consumers don't care about that, and neither should we. So most of the merchant partners that we have that also have a physical space were actually available there as well, and we have quite smart ways of doing that. Everything ranging from solving everything in our app and being a one-tap experience to actually being integrated into their POS system. So we're currently live with about 80,000 stores globally. And I do think we're going to see that expand more and more. So in-store is still the by far biggest commercial channel in the world. Like we all talk about the digitalization and e-commerce and all, but like there are few markets, if any, where e-commerce is more than 25% of GMV. That's important to state. So in-store is still huge for merchants, huge for consumers, and thus for us.
Mm-hmm.
Especially post-COVID now, I mean, going into Christmas, which is interesting. I mean, we are going to see I don't even remember last Christmas, sorry about that. But I do think regardless, we are going to see a comeback of malls and stores this Christmas season.
Do you anticipate it being a different experience for a consumer in a store than it was even a few years ago? Are stores more digitized? Is there, any other trends we should be looking out for?
Might be maybe that they're not more digitized, but I do think an interesting trend that we're hearing from our merchants, but maybe that is more a comment around how current digital consumer acquisition works, is that for many, at least for the bigger retailers and brands, in-store has become a more efficient acquisition channel than the digital space, with as you probably know, I mean, Facebook, Apple, Google, all being at war, driving up prices, driving up CAC, making digital marketing either unmeasurable or way too expensive. So the store has, I think we're going to see a different role of the store going forward, where it's not only about experience or sales, but it will be a lot about new customer acquisition as well, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. You talked earlier, when Klarna thinks about acquiring new customers, that you look for innovative, kind of creative ways to do that. Can you give us a few examples of ways that you've done that?
I mean, partnerships are really important to us, like both partnerships with the individuals, but also partnerships with our merchant partners, the retailers. I do think we've done a lot of events and pop-up stores, for example, together with our merchants, that are quite interesting. It's nothing new, but we are building a fairly solid referral program. We have 150 million, as I said, we have 150 million consumers globally. We're utilizing them in a much better way nowadays, right? And then I do think in general, the way in which we can utilize relevant data, since we have so deep consumer understanding, I mean, the relevancy of our targeting, of our marketing, and of our messaging is, I don't want to get too creative here, but it is, it's an important piece of how we acquire new users.
So I am sitting in the US, as I've said, and the Super Bowl is a big deal. I think I'm right in saying you guys executed your first Super Bowl campaign this last year.
Yeah.
We would love to hear more about that process for you. Was it your first in your career? How did it feel? How did it perform? How did it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, as we've said already, we have Swedish origin as a company. Breaking into the US market is maybe extra hard, or maybe I'm wrong, but the feeling is, as an outsider, it has been, it's been requiring a lot of extra work. So one of the strategies we've had is to adopt as many, American behaviors, brand behaviors, and really signaling that we mean business in the American market. So we're a big sponsor of the Chicago Bulls, for example. It's a huge thing for us. The NBA getting into the weeds of basketball culture, especially the Bulls being a huge franchise also outside of the US. So that is one thing of really getting into the US brand culture. But the Super Bowl was also one of those things where we said, hey, if we really mean business in the US, we have to do the Super Bowl, right? That is just the almost, I don't know, it feels like the epicenter of US marketing. And in many ways, that was the experience as well, right? So we decided fairly late that we wanted to do the Super Bowl. So we created a campaign in record time. I think we decided I think it was mid-November or something like that we should do the Super Bowl.
Wow.
And we started producing, I think after Christmas, if I remember. Yeah. So things moved really fast. But all in all, I mean, did it pay off? Yes, it did. Right, for the reasons I mentioned. I do think there's a huge signaling value that comes from the Super Bowl, showing merchants, showing consumers, showing employees that we really do care about the US market, that the US market now is by far our biggest priority here at the company, and soon to be by far our biggest market. And the Super Bowl is a piece in showing that. So it was the emotional side of the Super Bowl, but then also the rational side of the Super Bowl. I was extremely impressed by maybe not the Super Bowl itself, but all the fuzz around it. Like I mean, the US is built on entertainment and storytelling, and I do think the Super Bowl was really a masterpiece in that. Everything leading up till that, all the debate around the ads, the marketing, the brands, the best, the worst, all of that, right? It's often talked about as the World Cup of advertising, and to a large extent, it felt like the World Cup of advertising, and it continues to do so. So in many ways, it was a fantastic experience, and something to be proud of.
Will you be back?
I very much think so. I hope so. I don't want to talk about it too much, but I actually do think so. I think that showing up every year might not be wise, but I do think if you are a brand that is important in the US market, if you are part of pop culture, and if you want to be part of everyday life in the US for consumers and merchants, from time to time, you do actually have to show up in the Super Bowl.
That's fantastic. What is next? So there's a lot coming. You're a rapidly innovating, rapidly growing company, global expansion, retailer relationships. You have a creator platform. What can we expect from Klarna coming up?
I mean, it's mostly expanding on those products, right? There are a couple of huge bets that we're making that I truly believe in, like especially. I mean, it's I don't want to sit here and talk about the creator economy as if I've revealed anything grandiose that no one else is seeing, right? But tapping into the creator economy and really making sure that you play a part in that, like connecting merchants with creators, making sure that creators giving them the tools to monetize their audience and their reach. There is a huge play here. I mean, we've seen Shopify do it in the last couple of months with I think it's called Shopify Collabs, right? Something like that. But that is a big play that we're making, because I do think that the way in which we currently see retail and curation and point of sales is going to change rapidly. I do think that the next frontier of commerce are the creators themselves, and equipping them with the same tools as brands and merchants and retailers have been equipped with in the last couple of years. That is a huge play for us. Like, that is a huge play for us. If you think about it right now, you would think that Instagram and TikTok are fantastic platforms if you're a creator. They're not. They're not optimized for creators to monetize their audience, to start their stores, to sell products, to really be this facilitator and curator of brands and products and things like that. So I do think there's a huge opportunity there, and we're investing heavily into making that happen. Right.
I'm curious for you personally about some brands that you admire.
Yeah, I mean, I usually, when I get the question, I usually talk about Lego, because I think Lego is just such a fantastic brand in many ways, right? It partly has made a huge turnaround. So I do think, I mean, I always admire turnarounds. There are a couple of brands that pop to mind when I talk about turnarounds, but Lego has done a fantastic one. But they've also found, as I talked previously about when I say there are some universal truths and some universal behaviors when it comes to payments and shopping, I do think they found a universal truth when it comes to creativity, and that spans, across all age segments, almost across all markets. Like, it connects young and old in the same, almost in the same brand promise. And I do think that's a huge thing. And I don't think we've even found that for payments or shopping online yet. I don't think anyone has found that. But I do think having such a strong customer promise as Lego has, and then delivering on that continuously with the partnerships they've made with, Star Wars and Marvel and all of that, right? They continue to be relevant with a universal consumer promise. That is extremely, extremely hard. Like, being relevant with something that is, very specific or very short-lived, I do think that's easier. But being relevant with a long-term universal customer promise, like, wow, I'm mind blown by Lego and what they've done, to be honest.
But have you stepped on a Lego recently?
I actually have. My son is 6 years old and he loves Lego. But the interesting thing is, I love Lego as well. And they,
Right.
in the same experience, they bring that together. They don't have different instructions for him than for me, right? We both read the same instructions. We both get, get the same Lego pieces. It's so well done. And again, as we talked about before, like delivering on that customer promise over and over and over again in the same way, in the same repeatable way, that builds trust. And I do think that Lego is a company that you trust. Like maybe not trust with your finances, right? But if you would ask people like, do you trust this Lego set to be an interesting and fun experience? Most people would say yes, because the last 10 ones have.
Yes. So how as a marketer, so you talked about Lego's partnerships, and I think that's really interesting. And partnerships are a very important way for Klarna to continue growing. How do you identify as a CMO the partnerships that are lasting, that are culturally important, that align with your brand and your mission versus something that may be more a flash in the pan or may not elevate your brand in the way that you want? How do you choose the Chicago Bulls, for example?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a good question. There, to me, I mean, usually when we talk about things as the Chicago Bulls or a partnership that we do with Snoop Dogg or Lady Gaga or likes A$AP Rocky, we usually never start with a partnership. We usually always start with what do we want to accomplish or a job to be done, right? We start with that. We start with an idea, and then we look for amplifying partnerships. So very rarely, or I would never start with the partnership. Like I've been approached by so many different partners saying, hey, we should join forces. We're looking for a partnership. And although these are fantastic brands or fantastic projects, like it's so hard for me to not start with either the consumer experience or with the idea in itself, right? And then we usually find ambassadors or partnerships that really elevate that. So as I've already said, for the Chicago Bulls, I started with the experience, like what are a couple of things that, in a very relevant, probably local way can make us feel way more American and connected to US society, right? Instead of running these big brand ads, like what are the symbols and rituals that actually can make Klarna, can make US customers understand that we are part of US society and US daily life. And then you start looking at things. Then the Super Bowl makes sense, and then the Chicago Bulls make sense, right? We were obviously eyeing more partners than that, but the Chicago Bulls turned out to be fantastic. Like they shared a lot of our values. Once you then look into those partnerships and ambassadorships, they shared a lot of our values. They were as entrepreneurial as we were. They were open to new ideas. They were also trying to break a couple of the fixed rules and recipes for how you usually do partnerships. So they were a perfect match once we had the idea or job to be done, whatever we want to call that. So that is very important to me. And the same thing, I mean, when for the Snoop Dogg partnership, or when we partnered with the the stars from RuPaul's Drag Race, and not RuPaul himself, but the stars from RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, we had a job to be done, and we found that community to be the best accelerator of our idea.
Is there a role for just the big branding campaign? You started today by kind of saying that it certainly doesn't engender trust. Trust is how you show up. It isn't what you say necessarily, it's what you do. Does Klarna feel that big brand push on its own is still valuable, or is it all about creating relationships, serving the customer?
I still think it serves a role, a pretty big role, right? I think the honest truth is that consumers don't organically care about 99% of brands and messages out there, right? Usually when you hear this, it's like, yeah, but Tesla doesn't have a PR department. Yeah, well, but Tesla and Apple are two of very, very, very few selected companies that enjoy the natural interest and attention of consumers and media. And there are a variety of reasons for that. We don't need to go into them, but there are a couple of those. But for the vast majority, I would say 99+% of companies out there, consumers don't naturally care, right, about what they have to say. So I do think that brands need to build a stage, an arena, a way or a reason to communicate things that people maybe should care about, such as Klarna, but don't really care about, such as Klarna, right? And building that, the big brand campaigns, to me, they are more of a stage, right? I don't expect our core business metrics to shift fundamentally, 2 days after running a big brand campaign. I don't expect that. What I want to do with the big brand campaigns is I want to build a stage. I want to open up, the minds and hearts of people to actually, be receptive of our other messaging on the back end of that, right? And that is where I think that a lot of our competitors go wrong. They just, flood the market with rational, probably smart and good, reasonable messaging and advertising, but they forget the fact that people don't care. Like what they want to say and what people want to listen to is not the same thing, right? So instead of me explaining our products, I have Snoop Dogg explaining our products. It's a stage for our products and our benefits, right? So the big brand campaigns, yes, they are important, but maybe not for the reason that many people think.
David, that is so clear-eyed and self-aware and true. It's an important way for us all in the industry, I think, to anchor ourselves about what's real. What a wonderful way to end. I see Deanna is back, so I think we are at time. Were there any questions that we needed to field, or are we done here?
I think we're done. Thank you both so much. That was great. I just have one question for you, David. Will you be back at the Super Bowl next year?
Let's see about that. I don't want to go into
great.
those
We'll keep our
specifics.
eyes open for that.
You should.